In the quiet American town of Ashwood, Ohio, where mornings smelled of wet asphalt and burnt coffee and evenings settled in with the sound of televisions murmuring behind thin walls, no one noticed the moment everything began to slip. There was no scream, no sudden violence, no obvious warning that a family was drifting toward disaster. It started the way so many tragedies do in modern life, with exhaustion disguised as strength, with love confused for responsibility, and with a dangerous belief that things would somehow hold together on their own. This is not a story about evil born overnight. It is a story about what happens when warning signs are softened by familiarity, when denial feels safer than action, and when the most trusted hands are no longer steady enough to protect what matters most. Maribel Knox was the kind of woman people admired from a distance. In her early 40s, she worked long shifts as a registered nurse at Ashwood Regional Hospital, navigating crowded hallways, ringing monitors, and the quiet grief of other families with practiced composure. She had built a life that looked solid on the outside. A stable marriage, a modest home in a quiet subdivision, and a newborn son who seemed to give meaning to every sacrifice she had ever made. But beneath that surface was a constant, grinding fatigue that never fully lifted. Sleep came in fragments. Meals were rushed or skipped. Days blended together until time itself felt slippery. Her son Callum was 3 months old, small enough to fit perfectly against her chest, warm and impossibly fragile. He had a soft wheeze when he slept and a way of curling his fingers around hers that made her chest ache with a love so intense it frightened her. He was the center of her world, but also the weight that tipped everything else out of balance. Every decision now felt urgent. Every mistake felt unforgivable. And every request for help felt like an admission she was failing. Her husband Dean tried to be present, but he too was stretched thin. His job demanded long hours and emotional restraint, and he coped by focusing on logistics rather than feelings. Bills, schedules, repairs. He trusted Maribel's judgment, trusted that she knew how to manage what he could not see. When concerns surfaced, they were discussed briefly, then set aside in favor of getting through the next day. Then there was Loretta Knox. Loretta had once been formidable. The kind of woman who remembered birthdays without reminders, who canned vegetables in the fall and kept her house spotless without effort. She had raised Maribel alone after her husband died young, doing so with grit, pride, and an almost stubborn independence. Even as she aged, she resisted help. She waved off concerns with a sharp smile and insisted she was fine. For years, Maribel believed her. But time had been quietly eroding Loretta's mind. At first it was small things. Repeated stories. Missed appointments. Burned pots left on the stove. Then came the wandering, the misplaced accusations, the conversations that looped without resolution. Doctors used careful language, speaking of cognitive decline and progressive dementia. They recommended supervision, structured care, and hard conversations Maribel was not ready to have. Loretta still sounded like herself on the phone. She still laughed at old jokes. She still insisted she could manage. And Maribel, drowning in her own responsibilities, let herself believe it. Love became a justification for avoidance. Family became an excuse to delay decisions that felt overwhelming and cruel. When the opportunity arose to leave Callum with Loretta for just a few hours, it felt reasonable in the moment. Familiar. Harmless. It was only an afternoon. Only one evening. Loretta had raised a child before. She loved her grandson. Nothing bad had happened yet. That is how tragedies often announce themselves. Not with alarms, but with reassurance. No one in Ashwood marked the hour when Maribel pulled into her mother's driveway that day. No one noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, or the way she hesitated before handing over the diaper bag. The town went on with its routines, unaware that a fragile chain of assumptions was about to snap. What followed would expose the cost of postponement, the danger of denial, and the devastating truth that love alone is not enough when the mind begins to fail. And once that truth revealed itself, there would be no way to undo what had already begun. The afternoon Maribel Knox brought Callum to her mother's house unfolded with the deceptive calm of an ordinary day, the kind that leaves no mark in memory until it becomes impossible to forget. The sky over Ashwood, Ohio was a pale autumn blue, washed thin by drifting clouds that softened the sunlight as it spilled across quiet streets and aging porches. Leaves clung stubbornly to trees that lined the neighborhood, their colors dulled by the coming cold. It was the sort of day that felt safe, predictable, familiar enough to lower one's guard without noticing. Maribel's car rolled slowly into the cracked driveway of Loretta's small house, tires crunching over loose gravel that had not been replaced in years. The place looked the same as it always had from the outside. Beige siding faded unevenly by sun and rain. A porch railing that leaned slightly to one side. Flower beds once neatly tended now overtaken by weeds and dry stems. Maribel noticed these details as she always did, but filed them away under later, under someday, under things she would deal with when life was not so overwhelming. Inside the car, Callum stirred in his seat, letting out a soft sound that hovered somewhere between a sigh and a whimper. Maribel reached back instinctively, brushing her fingers across his blanket, feeling the warmth of him through the fabric. The motion grounded her. He was here. He was real. He needed her. Everything else faded beneath that truth. She checked the time on the dashboard and felt the familiar pressure tighten behind her eyes. She was already cutting it close. The hospital event was mandatory, framed as appreciation but enforced like an obligation. She told herself it was only a few hours. She told herself she deserved this small break. She told herself that Loretta was still her mother, still the woman who had kept a child alive with far fewer resources and far less support. Maribel lifted Callum from the car seat and held him against her chest, inhaling the clean scent of baby soap and milk. His head fit perfectly beneath her chin, his breathing slow and steady. For a moment, doubt surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. It whispered questions she did not want to answer. Is this a mistake? Are you ignoring something? What if? She pushed the thoughts aside and walked toward the front door. Inside, the house smelled faintly of dust and old fabric, layered with something sour she could never quite identify. The living room was dim, curtains half drawn, furniture arranged exactly as it had been for decades. Stacks of magazines leaned against one another near the armchair. A television played quietly, though no one seemed to be watching. Loretta emerged slowly from the hallway, her movements careful but uncertain, as if the floor might shift beneath her at any moment. Her hair was thinner now, more gray than brown, pulled back with a clip that barely held. Her eyes brightened briefly when she saw the baby, then clouded again, as though the recognition could not quite settle. "Well, look at that," Loretta said softly, smiling in a way that felt both warm and distant. "You brought the little one." Maribel corrected her gently, giving her name, reminding her of the plan, filling the air with cheerful instructions. She laid out bottles, diapers, extra clothes. She spoke quickly, efficiently, the way she did at work when time mattered more than comfort. Loretta nodded along, repeating some words, missing others entirely. The exchange felt wrong in subtle ways that were easy to ignore. Loretta held Callum too stiffly at first, then too loosely. She hummed under her breath, the tune slipping in and out of rhythm. She asked the same question twice within minutes. Maribel noticed all of it and still did not stop. Guilt pressed against her ribs as she kissed her son's forehead. It mingled with relief, with exhaustion, with the desperate desire to feel like herself again for just one evening. She told herself she would call to check in. She told herself she would not stay long. She told herself she was overthinking. When she finally stepped back outside, The door closing softly behind her, Maribel felt a strange lightness, followed immediately by a hollow ache. The house stood silent again, swallowing the moment whole. As she drove away, Ashwood continued on as it always had. People walked dogs. Cars passed at intersections. Somewhere nearby, a lawn mower droned. No one sensed the fragile balance tipping inside that quiet home, where memory and reality no longer obeyed the same rules. And in that stillness, the consequences of a single decision began to take shape, unseen and irreversible, waiting for time to catch up. Inside Loretta Knox's house, time no longer moved in a straight line. Once Maribel's car disappeared from view, the silence settled in layers, thick and disorienting, until the present moment lost its edges. Loretta stood in the living room holding Callum, unsure how long she had been there or why her arms felt heavier than usual. The television murmured softly, voices from an old program blending with the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of a clock whose hands she no longer followed. The house felt familiar and strange at the same time, like a place remembered through fog. Callum shifted against her, letting out a small sound that tugged at something deep inside her chest. The sensation was powerful but confusing. She knew in some distant way that she was supposed to respond, that the sound meant need, but the meaning slipped just as she reached for it. She rocked back and forth instinctively, the motion ingrained from decades of muscle memory. The rhythm calmed her nerves even as her thoughts scattered. Her mind drifted without warning. One moment she was in the living room, the next she was somewhere else entirely. A kitchen from her youth appeared in her thoughts, brighter and louder, filled with the smells of cooking and the constant movement of work that never ended. She remembered standing at a counter, preparing food, following routines so deeply learned they required no thought at all. Those memories pressed forward, demanding attention, overlaying themselves onto the present until the boundaries dissolved. Loretta carried Callum into the kitchen without consciously deciding to. Her feet knew the path even if her mind did not. The room looked wrong to her eyes, stripped and quiet compared to the bustling space in her memory, but she did not question it. She placed Callum down carefully, though not where a lucid person would have, then turned away to search through drawers. Her hands moved automatically, opening and closing, touching utensils she did not truly see. The baby fussed, his discomfort growing as the minutes passed. To Loretta, the sound no longer registered as a child's cry. It blended with imagined noises from long ago, signals her brain misinterpreted and reshaped. She felt a sense of urgency without understanding its source, a pressure to complete a task she believed was important but could not name. At times, clarity flickered. A thought surfaced that something was wrong, that she should call someone, that Maribel would want to know. Loretta even glanced toward the phone on the wall, her brow furrowing in confusion. But the moment slipped away before it could take hold, swallowed by the louder pull of distorted memory. The phone might as well have been a relic from another life. The house grew darker as evening approached, shadows stretching across the floor and up the walls. Loretta did not turn on additional lights. Darkness felt natural to her, part of the cycle she no longer tracked. She moved slowly, deliberately, her actions guided by habit rather than awareness. The kitchen filled with the quiet sounds of her movements, punctuated by Callum's cries growing weaker as fatigue overtook him. Outside, Ashwood carried on untouched. Neighbors prepared dinners, laughed with family members, settled in for the night. No one looked toward Loretta's house. No one knew that inside, reality had slipped so far out of alignment that danger no longer looked like danger at all. Eventually, exhaustion claimed Loretta. She sank into a chair, her breathing uneven, her thoughts dissolving into fragments. In her mind, tasks had been completed. Order had been restored. The discomfort she had felt earlier faded into a dull calm, leaving only confusion and weariness behind. Hours passed without meaning. The television continued to play to an empty room. The clock kept ticking. Loretta drifted in and out of shallow sleep, images from different decades blending together in her dreams. Faces appeared and vanished. Voices overlapped. Somewhere in the house, something was terribly wrong, but her mind no longer possessed the tools to recognize it. When the front door remained unopened and the phone remained silent, the weight of what had gone unnoticed settled deeper into the walls of the house. The consequences of cognitive decline, combined with absence and denial, had quietly reached their breaking point. By the time the night fully arrived, the damage had already been done, not in a single moment of cruelty, but through a slow collapse of perception, where love, responsibility, and reality could no longer find each other. The first sign that something was wrong did not come from a scream or a phone call, but from absence. As night settled over Ashwood, porch lights blinked on one by one, televisions glowed behind curtains, and families moved through their familiar routines. At Loretta Knox's house, nothing changed. No lights shifted. No movement crossed the windows. The stillness lingered longer than it should have, pressing against the awareness of those nearby in a way that was difficult to explain but impossible to ignore. Mrs. Caldwell, the neighbor across the street, noticed it while washing dishes. She had grown used to seeing Loretta shuffle past the front window at odd hours, sometimes waving at nothing, sometimes pacing as though waiting for someone who never arrived. That evening, the window remained dark. There was no sound. No sign of the baby Maribel had mentioned earlier that week. Mrs. Caldwell tried to shake the feeling, telling herself it was none of her business, but the unease followed her from room to room. Eventually, concern overcame hesitation. A call was made. Quietly. Carefully. The kind of call people make when they hope they are wrong. When the police arrived, they did so without urgency at first, lights off, movements restrained. 2 officers approached the house, knocking firmly but politely. Inside, the television continued to play to an empty room. Loretta did not answer immediately. When she finally opened the door, her expression was placid, unfocused, as though she had been interrupted in the middle of a dream. Her responses to questions were fragmented. She spoke of meals prepared, of people expected home, of tasks completed. She did not answer directly when asked about the baby. One officer exchanged a look with the other, a silent understanding passing between them. They stepped inside. The discovery unfolded not as chaos, but as a slow, sickening realization. The house bore no signs of struggle, no violence in the way people expect it to look. Instead, there was disorder born of confusion. Objects misplaced. Silence where sound should have been. The truth revealed itself piece by piece, each detail heavier than the last. By the time emergency services were called, the reality could no longer be denied. When Maribel and Dean returned later that night, they found their street transformed. Police vehicles lined the curb. Yellow tape cut across the familiar walkway to Loretta's front door. Neighbors stood in clusters, whispering, watching, recoiling when they recognized the couple approaching. Maribel felt the ground tilt beneath her feet before anyone said a word. She knew. Some part of her had known all along. She tried to push past the officers. She screamed Callum's name. Dean held her back as the truth was spoken in careful, controlled language meant to prevent panic but incapable of softening the blow. Her body gave out before her mind could fully process it. The sound she made did not feel human, and it echoed down the street long after she collapsed into Dean's arms. The days that followed moved with a strange, mechanical efficiency. Investigators documented the scene. Medical professionals completed their assessments. Reports were written. Timelines were constructed. Loretta was taken to a medical facility, not a jail, her confusion deepening as unfamiliar faces surrounded her. She asked repeatedly where her daughter was, why no one had come for dinner, Why everyone looked so serious. Psychiatric evaluations confirmed what had long been suspected and long ignored. Advanced dementia. Severe cognitive impairment. Inability to distinguish past from present, reality from memory. The conclusion was clear and devastating. Loretta had not understood her actions. She had not possessed intent. The law, bound by definitions of responsibility, could not treat her as a criminal. The decision not to prosecute came swiftly, though it felt anything but swift to those living inside the aftermath. When it was announced, the town reacted with divided voices. Some expressed compassion, others anger. Many simply fell silent, unsure how to reconcile the loss of a child with the absence of punishment. Maribel sat through meetings and hearings in a daze. Words washed over her without meaning. Dementia. Capacity. Liability. Neglect. Each term felt both accusatory and hollow. She did not blame the system. She blamed herself. Every missed visit. Every dismissed concern. Every moment she chose convenience over confrontation replayed endlessly in her mind. Loretta was transferred to a long-term care facility, where she spent her days under constant supervision, unaware of the storm she had left behind. In quiet moments, she spoke fondly of a baby she believed she had helped raise that afternoon. Nurses noted her gentle demeanor, her confusion, her complete lack of awareness of the tragedy tied to her name. The case closed on paper, but nothing closed in reality. The house on that street would never feel the same. Neither would the people who lived there. Ashwood returned to its routines, but a fracture remained beneath the surface, a shared understanding that something had gone terribly wrong not because of cruelty, but because no one acted soon enough. And for Dean, watching the woman responsible for his son's death walk away without punishment, something inside him began to harden, quietly and irrevocably, setting the stage for what grief would demand next. After the decision was announced and Loretta Knox was removed from the reach of the courts, something inside Dean fractured in a way that never fully showed on the surface. He did not shout. He did not break things. He did not collapse the way Maribel did. Instead, he went quiet, the dangerous kind of quiet that settles in when grief has nowhere left to go. The house became a place of echoes for him, each room reminding him of what had been taken without consequence. The nursery door stayed closed. The silence inside it felt deliberate, almost accusing. Dean had always been steady. That was how people described him. Dependable. Rational. The one who calmed situations rather than escalated them. In the weeks following Callum's death, friends and co-workers praised his composure, mistaking restraint for healing. They did not see what happened after dark, when he sat alone in the garage long after Maribel had gone to bed, staring at nothing while replaying the same thoughts again and again. The law had spoken. The system had decided. And in doing so, it had left him with a truth he could not accept. He attended meetings with lawyers and counselors, listened politely as professionals explained dementia and diminished capacity, nodded as they spoke about tragedy without blame. None of it reached him. All he heard was that the person responsible for his son's death would never answer for it in any way that mattered to him. She would sleep in a bed. She would be fed. She would be protected. His son was gone forever. Maribel tried to reach him, but her own grief left her hollow and unfocused. They spoke less with each passing day, conversations reduced to logistics and silence. She cried openly. Dean did not. He watched her with a mixture of guilt and resentment, feeling that someone had to hold the rage because she no longer could. In his mind, anger became purpose. Purpose became clarity. He began to read obsessively. Not news articles or opinion pieces, but practical information. Visiting hours. Facility layouts. Security procedures. He framed it as curiosity at first, then as the need for closure. He told himself he only wanted to look her in the eye. To understand how someone could erase a life and never even know it had happened. The idea did not arrive all at once. It grew slowly, fed by sleepless nights and unanswered questions. Each time he imagined Loretta sitting calmly in a protected environment, his chest tightened. Each time he pictured Callum's empty crib, the thought hardened. Justice, he decided, was not something the system was capable of delivering. If it was going to exist at all, it would have to come from him. When Dean finally visited the facility, the place did not resemble punishment in any form he recognized. It was clean, quiet. Staff moved gently through hallways, speaking softly to residents who wandered or stared into space. Loretta sat near a window, her posture small, her expression neutral. When she looked up at him, there was no recognition, no fear, no guilt. She smiled the way people smile at strangers who seem familiar but unimportant. Something inside Dean snapped at that moment, not violently, but completely. The act itself unfolded quickly, without drama, without confrontation in the way stories often portray such moments. There were no speeches, no accusations that could be understood. Loretta did not know who he was. She did not know what she had done. And that was what made it unbearable. Dean's grief demanded acknowledgement, and there was none to be found. When it was over, he did not run. He did not resist. He sat where he was, waiting, emptied of everything he had carried for months. Security arrived. Police followed. The facility erupted into chaos, but Dean remained still, his hands open, his expression blank. He answered questions simply. Yes. He had planned it. No. He did not regret it in the way they expected. The trial that followed was swift and unforgiving. Unlike Loretta, Dean was fully aware of his actions. Fully capable of understanding consequence. The same legal system that had shown mercy once now showed none. Prosecutors spoke of premeditation and choice. Defense attorneys spoke of trauma and psychological collapse. The jury listened, deliberated, and returned with a verdict that felt inevitable. Life imprisonment. When the sentence was read, Dean did not look at Maribel. He stared straight ahead, as though the courtroom were already behind him. In that moment, whatever remained of the man he had been disappeared entirely, replaced by someone defined by a single irreversible decision. Prison life stripped away the last illusions of control. Days were rigid. Nights were loud. Regret crept in slowly, not for Loretta, but for Maribel. For leaving her alone in the wreckage. For mistaking vengeance for healing. For believing that destruction could ever bring something back. Letters passed between them at first, awkward and fragile, filled with apologies and things neither knew how to say aloud. Over time, they became less frequent. Grief had taken them in different directions, and there was no path that led back to what they had been. Dean's act did not restore balance. It did not honor his son. It only widened the devastation, adding another life lost and another future erased. In trying to correct an injustice, he had created one more, proving too late that grief, when left to fester, does not seek resolution. It seeks replication. After Dean was taken away and the noise surrounding the trial slowly faded, Maribel Knox was left standing alone in the wreckage of a life that no longer resembled anything she recognized. The house felt wrong now, not just empty but distorted, as if the walls themselves remembered too much. Every room carried an echo. The kitchen where she once warmed bottles. The hallway where she had paced with Callum in the early hours of the morning. The bedroom where Dean's presence lingered like a shadow she could not escape. Silence pressed in from every direction, heavy and unrelenting. At first, Maribel tried to survive by routine. She returned to work, believing that motion might keep her upright. The hospital had once been a place where her skills mattered, where she knew how to respond to crisis with clarity and control. Now, the sounds of monitors and overhead announcements sent her heart racing. She found herself freezing mid-task, hands hovering uselessly as memories intruded without warning. A crying infant down the hall could reduce her to shaking tears in a supply closet. Colleagues noticed. Supervisors intervened. Compassion came in the form of forced leave and gentle conversations she barely remembered afterward. Days lost their structure. Maribel slept at odd hours, sometimes not at all. Food became an afterthought. Bills went unpaid. Mail piled up unopened. She stopped answering her phone. Friends who once brought meals and condolences gradually disappeared, unsure how to help someone who seemed unreachable. Grief isolated her more effectively than anger ever could. Guilt became her constant companion, not sharp and sudden, but slow and suffocating. It whispered through every waking moment. You left him there. You knew something was wrong. You chose convenience. No amount of therapy language could silence it. She replayed the afternoon she dropped Callum off endlessly, examining every expression, every hesitation she ignored. In her mind, time looped mercilessly, offering infinite chances to make a different choice that no longer existed. As months passed, Maribel's grasp on reality began to loosen in subtle ways. She heard sounds that were not there. A baby breathing beside her at night. Footsteps in the hallway. The soft hum of a lullaby she could not place. She knew logically that these things were impossible, but logic no longer carried authority. Her body reacted as if Callum still existed somewhere just out of reach. Neighbors noticed her wandering late at night, standing outside the old house where Loretta once lived, staring at the dark windows. She did not remember walking there. She only remembered standing still, overwhelmed by a sense that something inside was calling to her. When police gently escorted her home after one such night, she did not resist. She was too tired to be afraid. Eventually, intervention came not as punishment, but as necessity. Doctors spoke carefully, their voices calm and practiced. Severe depression. Complicated grief. Trauma-induced psychosis. Words stacked on top of one another, clinical and precise, attempting to map a pain that defied structure. Maribel listened without protest as plans were made for inpatient treatment. Resistance required energy she no longer possessed. The facility where she was admitted was quiet and orderly, designed to feel safe rather than confining. Days were filled with therapy sessions, medication adjustments, and long hours of sitting with her thoughts. Sometimes she spoke. Sometimes she did not. When she did, her words circled the same themes. Responsibility. Regret. Absence. She did not blame her mother anymore. She did not even blame Dean, not fully. She blamed herself for believing that love could substitute for vigilance, that familiarity could replace safety. Letters from Dean arrived sporadically. She read some. Others she left unopened, stacked neatly in a drawer. His words carried remorse and longing, but also a distance that could not be bridged. They were bound now by shared loss, but separated by choices that could not be undone. Forgiveness, she learned, was not a single act but a slow process that might never fully complete. Outside the facility, Ashwood moved on. New families moved into old houses. Children played in yards where tragedy once unfolded. The town learned briefly, then forgot. Awareness campaigns faded. Conversations quieted. Life reclaimed its routines. Maribel remained. In moments of clarity, she began to understand the shape of the story she was part of. Not a tale of monsters, but of neglect, delay, and human limits. A story about what happens when illness is minimized, when warning signs are softened, when responsibility is shared so broadly that it disappears entirely. She saw now that no single act had caused the devastation. It had been built slowly, choice by choice, silence by silence. Her future remained uncertain. Recovery was not linear. Some days were manageable. Others felt impossible. But in the quiet spaces between therapy sessions, she held on to one truth with growing certainty. Revenge had not healed anything. Denial had protected no one. And love, without action, had proven dangerously insufficient. If there was meaning to be found at all, it lived in that understanding. In the hope that telling the story might prevent another family from making the same mistakes. In the knowledge that caring for the vulnerable required more than intention. It required honesty, intervention, and the courage to act before it was too late. And so the story ended not with resolution, but with a warning, carried forward in memory and consequence, a reminder that neglect does not announce itself as cruelty, and that the cost of looking away can be immeasurable.